organic salad bar of believers, welcome, my non-university unstudents. Welcome to the Uncensored Unprofessor, a show where we dare to turn our brains on, think critically, a show where we recognize that bumper sticker slogans are really only about 1/64th of an inch deep, and yet millions live their lives based on bumper stickers.
Gosh.
So come on in, take your sunglasses off and think with me. In fact, I don't want to get too hoity-toity too fast, but I just hate it when people act all intellectual and talk about Mozart when they haven't even seen one of his paintings. Thank you, Mikey's Funnies, for that little stab at humor. Well, you guys, I did it. I went to the Hall of Horrors, the Office of Awfulness, the Chamber of Churlishness, the home base of badness, the prefect of pain, my local dentist. Yes, every 6 months I go in for a cleaning, or what those in the dental business call a training session. They train you to lay still in the long chair while they poke, prod, and scrape all around your mouth, just in general, tacitly remind you how much power they can lord over you. And this time, the lovely Carrie took care of me. She was my hygienist, and she was a sweetheart. She was interesting, too. She talked about the challenges of raising her 5-year-old for the Lord, asked me questions about my podcast. And me, I lay there wanting to give her thoughtful 3-minute answers, but with a rinsing tube, a pokey thing. I do believe that's the technical name for it, a pokey thing. And 4 of her fingers all jammed into my mouth, it becomes pretty difficult to answer in detail. Oh, and I'm so delighted to report, not only no cavities, but hardly any plaque buildup. You're doing a good job, Carrie said. Keep it up. Me bursting with pride. Really? Oh, thank you, thank you. I knew I could do it. I just did. Thanks for believing in me. Truthfully, I was happy to have about 1/8 the usual amount of pokey-hurdy time. It was a pain-free dental visit. But you guys, driving home, I thought to myself, yep, a little lifting now, a little effort now saves a pile of pain later, right? The little hassle of flossing most every night makes my time of discomfort in the dental chair shorter later. Most of life is like that. A little discomfort now, a little sacrifice now makes for long-term strides, lengthy gains later. Scholars have been telling us, even through statistical studies for at least a couple decades, that things like delayed gratification, sacrificial effort, daily commitment, endurance, gumption and grit, persistence, discipline are the elements that lead to success and profit later. A little pain now saves much pain later, or a little investment now equals a better retirement later. Or a bit of strategy now adds up to milestone success later. Today's I want it all and I want it now crowd needs some old-fashioned adulting. Delayed gratification be good for society, too. What's the difference between justice and social justice? Welcome to part 9 of my series, Cult of the Now. My attempt to explain not only the calls for violence and the actual nightly urban violence, but the calls for restructuring the American economic system and sheesh, even the moral cover that is being given to all of that by the media, politicians, universities, and church groups. Let me clarify. No, I do not believe everybody who's unhappy with the United States is a Marxist. Sheesh. I'm unhappy with the United States. No, I don't believe everyone protesting in the cities is a Marxist. There are possibly as many motives for peacefully protesting as there are folks marching. So then, why am you doing this series? Because those driving and inciting this violent foment, Attorney General Barr calls them Bolsheviks, those getting the lion's share of media coverage, A tiny percent, really, of the American population? Those who really are causing national change and those who are now receiving millions of dollars in funding are all definitively Marxists. The website Influence Watch reports that Black Lives Matter Incorporated, their net worth is around $133 million. Look, we all believe Black Lives Matter. Lord, rain your blessings down on black persons. But Black Lives Matter Incorporated, which began in 2013, is a proudly Marxist organization. Antifa, from what I can discern, there are far more whites wreaking mayhem in the name of Antifa than blacks. Antifa claims Marxist affiliation too. First, I want to work through Black Lives Matter Incorporated with you. Because in case you think me unfair, here's what BLM's own webpage says about their organization. Quote, Black liberation movements in this country have created room, space, and leadership mostly for black, heterosexual, cisgender men, leaving women, queer, and transgender people and others either out of the movement or in the background to move the work forward with little or no recognition. As a network, we have always recognized the need to center the leadership of women and queer and trans people, end quote. And then their webpage continues down a little further, quote, in 2014, Mike Brown was murdered by Ferguson police officer Darren Wilson. We understood Ferguson not as an aberration, but in fact a clear point of reference for what was happening to black communities everywhere, end quote. Now again, if you keep working through their webpage, Black Lives Matters Incorporated says, quote, what defunding the police really means. We know that police don't keep us safe. And as long as we continue to pump money into our corrupt justice system at the expense of housing, health, and education investments, we will never be truly safe. End quote. Now, quickly, first, again, this is me talking, that the government should pay for BLM's requested black housing, health plans, and education is not going to keep black communities safe either. So there's just a little logical fallacy to be noted there. But look, it's also just not true that, as BLM says, all black communities are having their citizens shot by white policemen. The Washington Post reported that in all of 2019 there were 25 unarmed whites and 14 unarmed blacks shot and killed by the police across the United States for the entire year. Those numbers are tiny compared to the numbers of whites who killed unarmed whites or the number of blacks who killed unarmed blacks. And obviously, it would not be the case that all of those 39 or those 14 police killings were unjustified. Yuck it. In no way do I want to diminish the pain of those 14 killings. Lord have mercy on the families of everyone involved. But last time I checked, 14 do not equate to everywhere. So the notion that police are roaming the streets looking for blacks to kill everywhere is a vile bumper sticker. Freakadelka, some stream of consciousness. Do you see that Seattle's police chief Carmen Best, herself a black woman, just resigned? Yep. Seattle City Council voted 8-1 in what is called a rebalancing package to lay off 100 of Seattle's 1,400 police. And the one no vote, Kashama Sawant, voted no because the cuts were not deep enough. Oh, man. Seattle City Council vote followed New York City's move of a couple weeks ago to cut $1 billion from their police fund. Yeah, so indeed, change is being affected. But Seattle Chief Carmen Best's salary was cut by 40%. So they're making deep policing budget cuts. And I wonder, what will that do to tourism in Seattle? What will that do to business in Seattle? Property values? Nuts. And who do you suppose will be the first ones hurt by those budget cuts? The poorest. It always works that way. Those who can least protect themselves, those who live in the most crime-ridden neighborhoods, they're the ones that are going to pay. And so, by woke actions like this, pushing out a black police chief, we now know this is not about diversity. It's not even about being anti-racist. It is about power. As I keep saying, power is the one ring that rules them all the time. So sad. The poor are going to suffer first in Seattle and New York City because of cuts and cults like this. Okay, back to Black Lives Matter Incorporated. They want to lift up the voices of the non-hetero, non-male black community. How? Through Marxist commitments. Through a strategic implementation of the many components of Marxist ideology that I presented to date in this series. Do you think I'm being unfair? Hear what online bios say about Black Lives Matters Incorporated's three founders, Alicia Garza, she's 39, Patrisse Cullors, 37, and Opal Tometi, 35. Patrisse Cullors said that, quote, she and her fellow organizers are trained Marxists, end quote. They were educated in the structures of critical theory. Cullors was trained in community mobilization by Eric Mann, who was a former member of the Weather Underground domestic terror organization. The New York Post reports that Cullors spent years absorbing the Marxist-Leninist ideology that shaped her worldview. Patrisse Cullors said, quote, we actually do have an ideological frame. Myself and Alicia Garza in particular are trained organizers. We are trained Marxists. We are super versed on, sort of, ideological theories, end quote. Now, Cullors is also the author of a book titled When They Call You a Terrorist, a Black Lives Matter memoir, 2018. Again, she describes herself as an anti-colonial, anti-imperialist, pro-communist who resists the U.S. empire. And I'll just pause to note that those anti-colonial, anti-imperialist, in Cullors' own self-description, go to that process of dissociation and historical dissociation that Shelby Steele discusses at length in his own book, White Guilt, How Blacks and Whites Together Destroyed the Promise of the Civil Rights Movement. My point in rehearsing all of that biographical information for you? I'm taking serious what BLM's founders and leaders say about themselves. Their worldview is a Marxist one. If you read through the links on their webpage, their vocabulary is consistently Marxist in orientation. And it is, as this series has noted, BLM is garnering significant cultural support. I think that makes it worth analysis, worth comparison to a Christian worldview. What about Antifa? Some say it is a very loosely affiliated organization with no chain of command. Other websites say it is a well-funded organization with local chapters in 49 American states, and that it was rabidly animated to further political action when self-described socialist Bernie Sanders lost his presidential bid in 2016. Now, from watching news reports about their Portland, Oregon actions, it seems pretty clear that their MO is to hijack peaceful protests, goad the police with violence, engage brief skirmishes with police, and then report out how fascist the government is for the doing. And I actually do believe that is a big part of what we're witnessing across the country. Goading the police or goading the feds, hoping someone will be hurt badly or killed so that the narrative can be spun about how fascist and racist and militant the government really is. Antifa uses both nonviolence, something they call digital activism, and violence. On Saturday, August 8th, Antifa set Portland's police union building on fire. And at that date, that made for 74 nights in a row of rioting in Portland, Oregon. That weekend, 49 people were arrested. So they use both nonviolence and violence, they say, to fight against racism, to fight against neo-Nazis, which means people they don't like, and white supremacists. Antifa, like Black Lives Matter Incorporated, hates capitalism. And Antifa is more insistent in saying that they're anti-authoritarian and anti-American. The truth is, you guys, there's more first-person online information about BLM than Antifa. Antifa clearly wants to remain in the dark, and I think that is itself a character reveal. So I went and read through Antifa's own webpage. In bold font, the masthead reads, quote, "We are working on a website for everyone fighting inequality and seeking justice. You each have an opportunity to do your own piece of the resistance to change the world through antifa.com." End quote. Now, if you read through their webpage, click through their webpage, you'll see that they hate Donald Trump.
Orange man bad.
They believe that Donald Trump foments racism and misogyny.
Orange man really bad.
They hate the KKK, which they say Donald Trump is causing to gain new recruits.
Orange man evil bad.
Their webpage has a link to their Twitter feed, which has a daily running video of scenes of anarchy from around the world fomented by Antifa. And if you keep reading through their webpage, wait a minute, did I say they loathe Donald Trump?
Orange man Hitler bad.
Honestly, I really don't know exactly what to make of Antifa. Like BLM Incorporated, they proudly stand for the LGBTQ agenda. They consistently show up to cause mayhem wearing black masks and hoods. So they do not want to be identified, which again is obviously a tell.
Chief Inspector Dreyfus, your eyebrow is twitching.
So it tells us that their doings are widely criminal. That's why they hide their faces. That's why they don't want to be identified. And it's interesting to me that they do that because the major media consistently reports that Antifa protests are peaceful. I think looking through their webpage that they lean more anarchist than Marxist. It just may be that they use Marxist language only because it is a kind of prepackaged dissociation. I don't know. But they are lauded by many on the left. Plus, as a matter of settled policy, the major media give them moral cover, so Antifa is influential. I mean, it's one thing when Ariel Atkins, a Black Lives Matter Incorporated organizer in downtown Chicago, reasoned that the $60 million in strategic looting on the weekend of August 8 was, quote, reparations. And that, quote, anything they wanted to take, they can take it because these businesses have insurance. There's that for you. But it's another thing entirely when the media and leftist politicians offer moral cover. Remember last episode I talked about illiteracy and running forklifts? Well, yesterday I was at a grocery store when a big semi-truck pulled up. As I was getting out of my car, I heard a loud smash, crash, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw an object rolling off the back of the truck. I looked over. It was a forklift. It had tumbled off something like 4 feet above the ground off the truck's lift gate. The driver of that forklift was sitting on it. He rolled onto the pavement dropped down those 4 feet, rolled onto the pavement, sat there stunned for 15 seconds. Then he realized he was okay and he got up. I went over to make sure he wasn't hurt. Nope, all good. But man, a forklift accident just days after I used forklifts as an analogy. Just bizarre. Well, with all that biographical background, since these are the leading voices for social justice right now, what is the difference between justice and social justice? For starters, go ahead, Jerry. I triple dog dare ya. Ask someone who promotes it to define it. You're likely to get blank stares.
You don't know what social justice is, you racist?
Remember, words for progressives are more like word clouds than they are specific, definable terms. Friedrich Hayek, Hayek, a British economist who critiqued the loosey-goosey use of social justice much of his adult life. Hayek died in 1992. Hayek said that the problem with social justice is that whole monographs and articles have been written about social justice without ever offering a definition of it. He said, quote, "It is allowed to float in the air as if everyone will recognize an instance of it when it appears," end quote. More than likely, Hayek reasoned, social justice will be defined by someone who says, quote, "We need a law against that," end quote. So, proving a negative. I wonder, will we have reached social justice when we eliminate all police? All military? Will we have social justice if schools no longer assign the grades of D or F? Will we have attained social justice when the government mandates special treatment under the law for minorities? Will St. Carl's irenic Hobbity Hollow be reached when everyone gets paid equally, no matter what? When the government pays for everyone's health care? Landlords should be forced to grant free rent? What is social justice?
Hey, what if the government sent grocery price controls? That'd be fair. Wait. Even I can see that we'd have economic meltdown in mere weeks. Oops.
What is social justice? Ask for a definition. Elimination of white county judges? Free gasoline for all drivers under 35 years old? Preferred parking for everyone everywhere? Ice cream vending machines in every high school hall? Ooh, I know. Free kombucha dispensaries at every city library. Oh, ha, ah. Sorry, I get caught up in the possibilities. I never knew social justice could be so exciting. Truth bomb. Social justice is an amorphous phantom. True, it sounds cool when chanted by crowds of thousands. And indeed, it's a dandy way to virtue signal in a journal article. But when it comes right down to it, it's an undefined or negatively directed term. It's tough to prove a negative, you guys. Again, Hayek said, quote, "As such, social justice becomes an instrument of ideological intimidation for the purpose of gaining the power of legal coercion," end quote. And again, defined by what it is not high unemployment, not inequality of outcomes. Defined by what it's not by those who so cherish it goes to that wise old adage, you cannot prove a negative. It is more an elusive negative than a measurable positive. And so, Friedrich Hayek continued, quote, "Social justice is either a virtue or it is not. If it is, it can be properly ascribed only to the reflective and deliberative acts of individual persons," end quote. After all, virtue is something a person can do, carry out, perform. But in fact, Hayek wrote, quote, "Social justice is constantly ascribed not to individuals, but to social systems," end quote. So we run into this knotty problem of defining it. We run into this knotty issue of whether it's virtuous or not. Virtue is measurable. Virtue is observable. Now, I don't want to lose you, my heretofore ear-glued listener. But social justice, it's really helpful to understand, social justice was not first used until 1840. And that means it began to be used in the era of modernism. And I'm not going to do a full-blown historical vignette here.
Vinaigrette?
No, vignette. I'm not going to do a full-blown historical vignette here, but suffices to say that modernism was permeated by the belief that God is dead. Again, a foundational premise of Marxism is that there is no God. In Marxist ideology, all there is material, matter. And the ardent modernists in the 19th century believed, since there is no God, and because God is a crude, pre-scientific holdover our reason will suffice. We can, by our own insight and our own rule and effort, we can order society by our reason, and that God evacuated reason elevated, that God evacuated worldview gave rise to the belief that we can perfectly structure society. We can make society supremely just. Why, the secular modernists were certain we can create a perfectly just society. Trust us.
Excuse me, dear. Would you please pass me the pouch of social justice? I'd like to reload my pipe.
Oh man, I'm going to say much more about this in a later episode on why Marxism promotes wokeness. But the thinking was in the midst of secular modernism, 19th and 20th century, that the thinking was that environment creates consciousness. Marx himself said environment creates consciousness. Now, Michael Novak, in a brilliant and fairly short analysis of social justice, Novak wrote, quote, "The modern notion presupposes that people are guided by specific external directions rather than internalized personal rules of just conduct," end quote. Novak's article is entitled Defining Social Justice. You can find it at the First Things webpage. I thought it was really elucidating. But remember, in Marxist anthropology, there is no imago Dei. There's no image of God. There's not an a priori spiritual soul through which or by which human beings process reality. Marxism says we are matter and only matter. And matter shapes us externally, so let's be mindful, they say, in turn to shape matter. And if we could, they'd say, oh, if we could just tweak, just dial in the frequency to a better external resolution, we can create a perfectly just social system.
Put your trust in us. Put your trust in us. Put your trust in us.
Soulless. And so, following that modernist pulse, that modernist arrogance, both Nazism and communism were attempted. Both were full-blown statist, socialist, one from the right, one from the left. They were both statist ideological attempts to create socially just societies, and both ended in unspeakable horror. Why? Because their premises, their presuppositions were erroneous from the get-go. But more, who can know how to create a perfect society? Who gets to be the arbiter of social justice? Joseph Stalin? Adolf Hitler? Gavin Newsom? Using what criteria? No, it's better to put in checks and balances that try to limit political and economic abuse than to overlay an entire arbitrary system that itself becomes a devouring monster. Hey, you guys, I'm getting ready to do what for this show is a major advertising campaign here in Spudland's Treasure Valley. You want to help? You can go to Patreon, Patreon, and make a pledge, $20, $50, $100. Then after it clears the first of the month, you can cancel it. You will have helped me big time. Now, I know it's in your heart, but please don't leave a briefcase full of hundreds on my doorstep overnight. You'd put me in a real ethical quandary. Another way to bless the show, pray for me, for protection, for the Lord's daily bread, for wisdom. Still another way to promote the show, go sign up for my newsletter at www.uncensoredunprofessor.com. Thanks. Now, obviously, in the value system of the Marxist cult, the rise of the term social justice implies that justice in and of itself is insufficient, right? If justice were enough, there would be no need for social justice. But we Christians need to be clear. The Bible never uses the phrase social justice. And it never uses personal justice or economic justice or racial justice or culinary justice.
We should all have the right to eat cake.
Sorry, my friend, no adjectives. Only justice in the Bible. Why dat? God is a God of justice, pure and simple. Ali Stuckey in a Prager video rightly noted that justice is getting what you deserve without favor, whereas social justice is getting what you don't deserve because you are favored. She said, justice demands that everyone be equal under the law. Social justice demands that everyone be equal, period. Economically, socially, and in every other possible way, end quote. Lost in social justice is something that I, the UU, have touched upon repeatedly in this series, The Cult of the Now, and what gets lost is the individual's responsibility, personal agency. The Bible teaches we are personally responsible. SJWs, like cherished modernists, believe that we make our decisions based on external environments, the shape of society, the nasty things that capitalists force us to choose. And so, in Marxist ideology, personal agency is erased.
You are your class. You are your race.
Again, SJWs, social justice warriors, say that justice, historically understood, is unfair. They say we don't know a person's story. We don't know whether he was beaten by his father or abused sexually by his uncle, so we have no right to judge an individual person. But justice says we don't judge based on a person's story per se, but on whether or not he committed the crime. Or put differently, justice is concerned with truth, not life stories. Justice asks, did he do it? Yeah, he's guilty. Oh, he didn't do it? Right? He's innocent. Social justice, and again, you guys, here's where the Marx-based worldview comes to play. Social justice says we determine justice by groupings, by classes, by races. We don't judge individuals. That would be to blame the helpless victim. No, they say we judge groupings. So if you're in the evil grouping, white, hetero, male, Judeo, Christian, middle class, rich, or powerful, however powerful is defined, if you're any of that, you are guilty. But if you're in the noble grouping, colored, LGBTQ, female, secular, non-religious, lower class or poor or weak, however weak is defined, then you are innocent. If you're in the wrong, hateful, historically discriminatory, rich, oppressive grouping, then you're guilty and you owe. If you're in the right, noble, decent, historically oppressed group, then you are innocent and you are owed. It's a really divisive, dividing view that tries to separate humanity by the haves and the have-nots. Again, and the premises of all that is rooted in Marxist philosophy. Oh, wild stuff. Yesterday, a blue-nosed clown held the door open for me. I thought it was a kind jester. Here's why social justice terminology is so attractive. Michael Novak says the logic goes like this, quote, you suffer? Your suffering is caused by powerful others. These oppressors must be destroyed, end quote. And you guys know this, but that kind of thinking, that kind of reductionistic logic draws the moths to the fire. It invites the sheep to lush green clover they couldn't have found by themselves. And it's not hard then to see why villains are so cherished or hated. No, it is cherished. It's positively an adrenaline rush to have a villain that one can blame for one's suffering. It not only removes the blame from one's own inaction or actions, it presents us with someone we can hate together.
Miserable darling, isn't group hate just delish? Oh, the spectacle of our shared 2 minutes of hate. Unifying, ha-ha!
Pro tip, make sure to paint the guy you hate as a dope, a dunce, someone ignorant about current pop culture. That'll help foment how villainous he really is. You guys, this is important for a show where Christians think together. The Bible does not present the world in these group bifurcations. As I said recently in a long Facebook post where I called out this pernicious way of construing reality, a singular genius of the Bible, it nowhere assigns the root of sin to a single ethnic tribe. No specific human culture is the great jackal in hiding. We are all to blame and therefore all in need of a divine Savior. In fact, in contrast to the cult's push for social justice, a framing of justice that decidedly emphasizes this group over that group, in contrast to that kind of framing, the Bible nowhere calls to favor one group over the other. The Bible repeatedly, Virginia, calls for justice whereby no one is given preference over the others. Not even Jews, not even Christians, not even the poor, Leviticus 19. Not even what is important to the popular crowd, Exodus 23. The New Testament echoes the Old Testament, Romans 2, God shows no partiality. Or Jesus in Matthew 4:45, the rain falls on the just and the unjust. Now, if you hang out in certain Christian circles, you will hear this one. God is a preferential option for the poor. Moi? I heard that one for 25 some years at an annual academic conference I used to attend. And across the biblical witness, it is true. God does defend the poor. He attends to the cries of the poor. Why? Well, at least because in the ancient world, the rich almost exclusively got rich by taking it from the poor. Whether through warfare, pillaging and looting, or through oligarchical arrangements, which still continue to typify vast sweeps of our planet, or through brutal economic conditions, or unspeakable lending practices that enabled the rich to get over on the poor. But there is an erroneous application that today accompanies the argument which says God is a preferential option for the poor, and it is that today's economic world is presented as a one-for-one with ancient economies. Oh my gosh, just saying that, there's so much to work through. But it's just not true, you guys, as the woke cult tells us. It's not true that there is a fixed sum of economic pie in the world. The pie, the amount of capital, was more fixed in the ancient world. Today, the pie can fluctuate wildly. It's just not true that economics is a zero-sum game where if one person has something, that another person has to not have it. It's just not true that if Jeff Bezos is rich, that is therefore a one-for-one with forcing you to be poor. Economics is complicated. Capital fluctuates. And there's a gazillion times more capital today than in the ancient world. How much? A gazillion, Jerry. Despite what the SJWs constantly argue, the rich can get richer and the poor can become better off. Both. That's what happened for billions of people in the 20th century. They were lifted out of abject poverty by capitalism. So, let's be clear. Is there still greed in the world? Of course. Is there still abuse in the world? Of course. Nike, geez, woke Nike pays foreigners pennies on the dollar compared to what they'd have to pay Americans to make shoes. Is there still manipulation? Exploitation? Yes. Sheesh, I should know. I taught adjunct for 10 years. Exploitation to the nth. But was the ancient Middle Eastern agrarian barter system the same as a 21st century free market capitalism system? Hardly. No. Apart from military conquest or being a venturous sea merchant, in the ancient world there was virtually no way out of generational poverty. And that, well, for starters, that's where the Marxist read of the scriptures goes off the rails. Well, and again, that Marx hated God, that Marxist premises are resoundingly anti-God, anti-Christian, anti-history, anti-Semitic, anti-church, anti-truth, and anti-Bible. Other than those little exceptions, the Marxist interpretive hermeneutic is dead on target. They so despise capitalism that they allow that hatred to override careful biblical exegesis, a careful hermeneutic of Scripture. And then they mostly use the Bible to carry the water for their own agenda. It happens far too often. I've seen it even among big-name scholars. And just to finish the contrast, in today's capitalistic world, one has a decent chance of escaping generational poverty, especially as compared to life 400 years ago and 1,000 and 2,000 and 10,000 years ago. Way better chances today. But back to the Bible, God is no respecter of persons. And the Bible repeats that theme. God shows no partiality to the rich or the poor. And concomitantly, we are repeatedly enjoined by the Bible to show no partiality to the rich or the poor, or even the politically powerful. Justice must be blind, or else it is unjust. Justice that shows preference is, by definition, unjust. Social justice, full stop, is not a biblical concept. Does God care about those who suffer? Shnikes, yes. Does God want us indifferent to those in poverty? Crikey, no. But when I criticize 9 decades worth of American welfare as not only not helpful, but as positively hurtful for mostly turning generations of people into indentured government servants, I'm not saying I don't care about poverty. I'm saying what we've done to millions hasn't worked. So, what do we need? Justice. Not economic justice, not even culinary justice. And social justice, because it's indefinable, it will not do. Does not abide. We need justice. Lord have mercy. Oh, you guys, my gratitude to you today for listening. And if you've told a friend about the show, big evangelical side hugs. Please go and turn your beautiful God-given brains on, everybody.